He only wanted to deliver a toy in a snowstorm. He never expected it would change his entire life. The town woke up to a winter unlike any other. Snow had been falling since midnight, turning the streets into a white blanket that made even the simplest tasks feel impossible. Cars were buried under layers of ice and snow, sidewalks disappeared under thick drifts, and the wind howled like a restless wolf through the empty streets. Most people stayed indoors, wrapped in blankets, sipping hot drinks, and hoping the storm would pass quickly. But not Jake. Jake was a mechanic. He ran a small garage on the edge of town, the kind of place where the smell of oil and engine grease mixed with the warmth of a small heater, struggling to keep the place cozy. He was known in the neighborhood for being helpful, kind, and always willing to go the extra mile, even if it meant he wouldn't earn much for it. That morning, as he sipped his steaming coffee and looked outside at the relentless snowfall, the phone rang. On the other end was a soft, anxious voice of a mother explaining that her daughter had been dreaming about a special toy for months. It was a small, hand-painted doll that had sold out everywhere, and she had finally managed to order it. But the storm had delayed deliveries, and she was desperate. Her little girl was waiting, and this toy was meant to bring her a moment of pure joy, a spark of happiness in the middle of a harsh winter. Hearing the urgency and the hope in the mother's voice, Jake didn't hesitate. Without even asking about payment or thinking twice about the storm outside, he promised that he would deliver the toy himself. It wasn't an easy decision. The roads were dangerous, and the snow was piling higher with each passing hour. The thought of getting stuck, slipping, or even damaging his truck crossed his mind, but he shook it off. He knew that sometimes helping someone meant facing risks, and the joy of a child was worth more than any trouble he might face. He quickly bundled up in layers of clothing, wrapping a thick scarf around his neck, pulling on heavy boots, and putting on gloves that were worn from years of working with engines. In his truck, he carefully placed the toy, making sure it wouldn't get crushed or wet during the journey. As he started the engine, the cold air bit at his face through the small cracks of the window. The truck roared to life, and he felt the familiar vibration beneath him, a reminder that he had faced challenges before, and he could face this one too. Snowflakes whipped against the windshield, sometimes blinding him for a moment, but he kept moving slowly, carefully maneuvering through the blocked streets. Every few minutes, he had to stop to clear the snow from the tires or to nudge his truck out of a drift that tried to trap him. What kept Jake going wasn't just the promise he made, was the thought of the little girl. He pictured her excitement when she would finally hold the toy in her hands, sparkle in her eyes, and the pure happiness that would light up her face. He imagined her jumping up and down, hugging the doll tightly, and telling her mother how wonderful this moment was. That mental image gave him energy, even when his fingers felt numb and his boots were soaked with snow. Along the way, Jake encountered other people struggling in the storm. Cars were abandoned, and some drivers were trying to push their vehicles through drifts that seemed impossible to cross. Without a second thought, he stopped to help, pushing a car here, offering advice there. He never asked for thanks or reward. Helping people was just part of who he was. He knew that if he was in that situation, he would hope someone would do the same for him. The storm, which could have been an excuse to stay warm and safe, became a stage for acts of kindness and courage. And Jake moved through it like a force of determination. Hours passed and the snow didn't stop. Each mile felt longer than the last, but he never slowed his resolve. He checked the map in his mind and through his old GPS, tracing every turn, making sure he didn't get lost in the quiet, snow-covered town. At times, the snow piled so high, it seemed impossible to continue, and his truck tires spun in place. But he kept trying, inch by inch, pushing forward. He reminded himself that a little girl was waiting somewhere. Her excitement and trust in this simple act depended on him. Even the simplest obstacles became adventures. A fallen tree blocked one small street, and Jake had to carefully maneuver around it, scraping the truck against icy branches. A frozen puddle covered the road, turning it into a slippery challenge that tested his driving skills. Every challenge was a test of patience and courage. But he faced each one with a smile, imagining the little girl's joy as his reward. He hummed songs to keep himself warm, and every so often he shouted a small cheer when the truck finally managed to climb over a snowdrift. Despite being exhausted, wet, and cold, he refused to turn back. Other people might have called it impossible or crazy, but Jake believed in keeping promises. A promise, he knew, was more than words. It was a bond of trust. And in moments like this, it carried a weight heavier than the snow around him. He thought of the little girl as a bright light in the middle of this storm. A reason to keep going when every instinct told him to stop. By the time he was halfway through the town, the snowfall was even heavier, and the wind stronger. Visibility dropped, but Jake adjusted, moving slowly but steadily. He focused not on the danger, but on the importance of the journey. With every push of the gas pedal, he felt closer to his goal. The storm was fierce, but his determination was fiercer. The small garage, the warm heater, and his cozy routine were far behind him now. Out here in the white wilderness of the town streets, he was a man on a mission. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of snow, cold, and endless driving, he could see the outline of the neighborhood where the little girl lived. The sight gave him renewed energy. He knew that all the struggles, the freezing wind, the snowdrifts, the treacherous roads were about to be rewarded with a moment of pure happiness. His heart beat faster with excitement, not for himself, but for the joy he was about to deliver. Jake parked the truck carefully at the edge of the snowy street. His gloves were soaked, his boots heavy, and his jacket covered in white frost. But he didn't care. In his hands, he held the precious toy, wrapped and safe from the storm. He took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs, and started walking through the thick snow toward the house, imagining the little girl's smile and the relief in her mother's eyes. Every step was a small victory, every breath a reminder of why he had chosen to do this. In that moment, the snowstorm wasn't just a challenge, it was a backdrop for courage, kindness, and determination. Jake, the humble mechanic, had become more than a helper. He was a hero in his own quiet, selfless way. About to deliver more than just a toy, he was delivering hope, joy, and a reminder of the power of simple acts of love in the middle of life's storms. The snowstorm had not slowed down, it had only grown stronger. By the time Jake left the edge of town, the streets had become almost unrecognizable under layers of white. Every road was a challenge, every turn a small adventure, and every mile tested his patience and skill. But Jake was determined. He had a promise to keep, and nothing, not wind, not snow, not slippery roads, was going to stop him from delivering the toy to the little girl waiting somewhere in the storm. Driving through thick snow is never easy. Jake's truck struggled, its tires slipping on frozen roads. Each bump or skid made his heart race, and he had to adjust constantly, steering carefully to avoid sliding off the road or hitting hidden obstacles buried beneath the snow. Sometimes the truck would get stuck in a drift, and he had to hop out, shovel snow around the tires, and push the heavy vehicle until it finally moved. The cold bit through his gloves, numbing his fingers, but he ignored it. The thought of the little girl's excitement kept him going, warming him from the inside out. The storm wasn't just snow. It was a combination of heavy wind, freezing temperatures, and an almost blinding whiteout. At times he could barely see more than a few feet ahead. Street signs disappeared under layers of ice and snow, and familiar landmarks became unrecognizable. Many drivers would have turned back or waited for the storm to end, but Jake refused. He had made a promise, and promises were sacred to him. Each time he thought about giving up, he imagined the little girl clutching the toy, smiling from ear to ear, and he would press on, determined to reach her. Along the way, Jake encountered others, struggling in the snow. Cars were abandoned, people were shivering, and some drivers looked lost and scared. Jake couldn't just pass by. He stopped several times to help people push their vehicles out of drifts or to guide them safely along the icy streets. Even though it slowed him down, he didn't mind. Helping others was part of who he was. He understood the fear and frustration of being trapped and wanted to make the journey a little easier for those around him. Each small act of kindness reminded him that he was part of something bigger, that even in a storm, humans could show compassion and courage as he continued. The snow grew heavier and the cold intensified. His breath froze in the air, forming little clouds that quickly disappeared into the storm. His boots were soaked, his coat covered in frost, and his hands ached despite the thick gloves. But he never complained. He had faced challenges before in his life-broken engines. Long nights in the garage, difficult customers, but this felt different. This was personal. This was about bringing joy to a little girl, about keeping a promise that meant something more than just a simple delivery. The journey was slow. Every mile felt like a small victory. Jake had to navigate carefully, avoiding hidden ice patches and deep snowdrifts. Sometimes he had to backtrack, find another route, or push his truck out of a stubborn drift. He hummed songs to keep himself awake and focused, tapping the steering wheel to the rhythm, almost like a heartbeat guiding him forward. Occasionally, he would glance at the toy safely tucked in the back seat, imagining the little girl's hands reaching out for it. That image kept his spirits high, even as fatigue and cold tried to slow him down at one point. Jake came across a car completely stuck in a drift. A young woman was struggling to get it out, her hands red and frozen, her face full of frustration. Without hesitation, Jake parked his truck, grabbed a shovel, and helped her dig the car out. They worked together, laughing despite the cold, until the vehicle finally moved. The woman thanked him profusely, but Jake just smiled, saying it was nothing. He didn't want praise, he just wanted to keep moving, toward his own mission. Moments like these reminded him that acts of kindness could spread even in the harshest conditions. The snow kept falling, thick and relentless. The wind howled like a wild animal, pushing against the truck, trying to force it off the road. Visibility dropped to nearly zero, and Jake had to rely on his instincts, his knowledge of the town. It's a careful handling of the truck to keep moving. Every mile was a test of skill and courage, and every small success was a reminder of his determination. He knew that if he could survive this journey, the joy waiting at the end would make it all worth it. Hours seemed to stretch endlessly. Time lost its meaning in the storm. Jake's mind wandered as he drove, thinking about the little girl, her mother, and the world outside his garage that he so rarely ventured into. He thought about how fragile life could be, how easily obstacles could stop someone in their tracks, and how important it was to act with courage and kindness. The snowstorm, though harsh and unforgiving, became a backdrop for these thoughts, a reminder that true determination shines brightest in difficult times. Sometimes, the truck would skid on hidden ice, forcing him to react quickly, gripping the steering wheel tightly, adjusting his speed, and carefully maneuvering around obstacles. His heart raced with every small challenge, but each one made him more alert, more focused. He realized that the journey itself was teaching him lessons about patience, resilience, and the rewards of persistence. Even in the cold and snow, there was beauty, a quiet, serene world, untouched and still, where every snowflake seemed to sparkle like a tiny jewel in the dim winter light as he neared the neighborhood where the little girl lived. Jake felt a surge of hope and excitement. The thought of finally reaching his destination, of seeing the joy on her face, gave him energy despite the exhaustion. Every push of the truck through the snow felt lighter. Every step closer to the house seemed easier. He knew that soon, all the struggle, all the cold, and all the challenges would be worth it. Finally, after what felt like hours battling the storm, Jake saw the familiar outlines of houses peeking through the snow. Trees were heavy with ice, rooftops glistened with frost, and the streets were still difficult to navigate, but he was close. The thought of the little girl waiting, perhaps peeking out the window, filled him with warmth. His journey had been long and difficult, but it had also been meaningful. The snowstorm had tested him, pushed him to his limits, and reminded him of the value of determination, kindness. In keeping promises, Jake parked his truck carefully, making sure it didn't get stuck in the final stretch of snow. He grabbed the toy from the back seat, its colorful wrapping standing out against the white world around him. As he trudged through the thick snow toward the house, he felt a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and excitement. Each step was heavy, but every footfall brought him closer to the moment he had imagined for so long, a little girl's smile. The sparkle in her eyes and the warmth of a small act of kindness that could brighten the coldest of days. The snowstorm, which had seemed so intimidating at first, had become a stage for courage and compassion. Jake had faced it with determination, heart, and a sense of purpose. And now, at the doorstep of the little girl's home, he was ready to deliver more than just a toy. He was ready to deliver happiness, hope, and a reminder that even in the harshest winters, warmth could be found in acts of kindness and the human heart. After hours of battling the relentless snowstorm, Jake finally reached the neighborhood where the little girl lived. The streets were almost unrecognizable under the thick blanket of snow. The wind continued to howl, pushing snowflakes against his face. His boots sank with each step, the cold biting through even the thickest layers of clothing. Yet, despite the exhaustion and the chill that made his fingers numb, he moved forward with determination. The toy, carefully wrapped and protected in his hands, was more than just a package. It was a promise, a piece of joy that he had fought through the storm to deliver. As Jake approached the house, he noticed the warm glow of lights through frosted windows, a stark contrast to the harsh white world outside. The little girl was probably inside, waiting with anticipation, and the thought made his heart swell. He knocked on the door, and it opened slowly, revealing her mother, who looked tired but hopeful. The scene was simple, yet it carried a sense of significance. In the middle of the storm, here was a man who had risked everything to keep a promise to a child he had never met. The little girl ran forward before her mother could even say anything. Her eyes widened with wonder at the sight of the toy, and she squealed with delight, clutching it tightly. Jake couldn't help but smile, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the heater in his truck or the layers of clothing he wore. The snowstorm, the long journey, and the exhaustion faded away in that moment. He realized that this small act of kindness, though simple, had created a moment of pure happiness that would stay with the girl forever. Her mother stood quietly, watching the scene unfold. She was struck by Jake's dedication and kindness. Noticing how he had come all this way, risking his safety to bring joy to her daughter, it was then that she recognized him. Years ago, Jake had helped her father with an old car, offering his skills without asking for anything in return. She had never forgotten that act of generosity. And now, here he was again, showing the same selfless character. The realization hit her that kindness often comes in unexpected ways, sometimes resurfacing years later in the most meaningful moments. Jake knelt down to the girl's level, handing over the toy and helping her unwrap it. Her eyes sparkled, her smile was radiant, and her laughter was contagious. The mother watched in amazement as her daughter hugged the toy, her joy evident in every movement. In that instant, Jake understood why he had endured the storm, why he had pushed through the obstacles, and why he had refused to give up. The reward was not money, recognition, or praise. It was this moment of happiness, simple and pure, shared between a man, a little girl, and a mother who had been silently observing. The mother invited Jake inside, and he stepped into the warmth of the home, shaking off the snow and cold. He could see the relief and gratitude in her eyes. They talked quietly, and she expressed her heartfelt thanks, not just for the delivery, but for the courage and dedication it had taken to come through the storm. Jake smiled humbly, shrugging off the praise, saying that it was nothing, just a small effort to bring a bit of happiness in a difficult time. But the mother saw it differently. To her, this wasn't a small effort. This was an extraordinary act of selflessness that deserved recognition. As they sat together, the mother shared her own story briefly about how life had been challenging after her husband passed away. She had worked hard to provide for her daughter, often sacrificing her own comfort and happiness. She had climbed the corporate ladder and eventually became a CEO, a position of power and influence. But despite her success, she realized that true character and worth weren't measured by wealth or status. They were measured by actions, by integrity, and by the willingness to help others without expecting anything in return. Jake, with his quiet courage and determination, embodied those very values. Meanwhile, Jake listened, quietly absorbing the story, feeling a sense of connection and understanding. He could see the struggles she had faced, And he appreciated the resilience and strength it must have taken to reach where she was. At the same time, he shared his own life in the garage, the challenges of running a small business, the long hours, the tough customers, and the small victories that made it worthwhile. Their lives were very different on the surface, yet in that moment there was a bond, a shared understanding of perseverance, kindness, and the importance of human connection. The little girl, oblivious to the deeper conversation between the adults, continued to play with her new toy. Her laughter echoed in the room, light and pure, creating a warm atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the harsh storm outside. Jake watched her, feeling a sense of fulfillment that was impossible to describe. He realized that sometimes the smallest gestures, like delivering a toy through a snowstorm, could create the most profound impact. It wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about reward. It was about bringing joy to someone else's life. The mother couldn't help but reflect on the stark contrast between her life as a CEO and Jake's life as a mechanic. She had a powerful position, made important decisions, and commanded respect. Yet here was a man who had risked everything for kindness, whose worth could not be measured by wealth or status. She realized that true greatness lay not in what one had, but in what one gave. Jake's actions reminded her that human kindness, courage, and compassion were far more valuable than titles or money. After a while, Jake prepared to leave, knowing that the journey back would be just as challenging. The mother thanked him again, and this time, she offered more than words. She recognized the potential for a lasting connection, a bond that could grow beyond this single act. Jake felt appreciated not just for the delivery, but for the character he had shown, the dedication, the courage, and the selflessness that defined him as he stepped back into the snow, the wind biting at his face once more. Jake felt a sense of satisfaction that warmed him far more than any coat could. He had delivered more than a toy. He had delivered happiness, hope, and a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, human kindness could prevail. The snowstorm, which had seemed overwhelming at first, had become a journey of courage and compassion, a story of perseverance, and a testament to the power of small acts of love in a world that often feels cold and harsh. Walking back to his truck, Jake glanced at the little girl playing with her toy through the window. Her laughter and excitement were rewards that no money could buy. He realized that moments like these were what life was really about, connecting with others, keeping promises and acting with kindness even when it's difficult. Every mile of snow he had plowed, every obstacle he had faced, and every struggle he had overcome was now worth it. He felt fulfilled in a way that only comes from making a real difference in someone's life. Even in the smallest way, as Jake drove away from the house, the storm still raging around him, he carried with him not just the exhaustion of a long journey, but a profound sense of purpose. He had seen firsthand how courage and selflessness could touch lives in ways that mattered. And although the little girl might never remember the struggles he faced on the snowy streets, she would always remember the joy, the toy, and the man who went out of his way to bring her happiness. For Jake, that was enough. That was everything. After the initial excitement of the toy's delivery, Jake and the mother found themselves sitting in the warm living room, watching the little girl play with her new gift. The storm outside still raged, but inside, there was a sense of calm, comfort, and connection. It was in this quiet moment that the real story began to unfold. Beyond the snow, the struggle, and the promise. For the mother, it was a chance to see the man behind the act of kindness, to understand the heart and character that drove him. For Jake, it was a rare moment to connect with someone on a deeper level, share stories and experiences that weren't just about work, survival, or daily life. The mother began to speak softly, her voice carrying a mixture of pride, exhaustion, and vulnerability. She told Jake about her journey from a struggling single mom, barely making ends meet, to a woman who had climbed the corporate ladder to become a CEO. She shared the challenges she had faced raising her daughter alone, the nights she stayed up worrying about bills, the sacrifices she made to ensure her child never went without, and the doubts she had about herself. She explained how hard she had worked, not just to succeed in her career, but to provide stability, security, and happiness for her family. Every word carried weight, and Jake listened intently, recognizing the strength and resilience behind her story. Jake, in turn, shared his own life, but his story was different. He talked about the garage he ran, the long hours, the challenges of fixing cars and helping customers who often didn't appreciate him. He described his simple life, his struggles, and his philosophy about helping others whenever possible. He didn't have wealth or status, but he had a sense of purpose, a belief that small acts of kindness could create ripple effects far beyond what anyone could imagine. He told stories of people he had helped in small ways strangers stuck on the road, neighbors in need, even friends who needed advice, and how those moments, though small, gave him satisfaction and meaning. As they talked, an unexpected connection began to form. Despite the differences in their lives, her life filled with corporate meetings, business decisions, and public recognition. And his life filled with grease, engines, and quiet service, they found common ground. They both valued honesty, integrity, and selflessness. They both understood that true worth wasn't measured by money, power, or status, but by the choices a person made and the impact they had on others. Jake's actions in delivering the toy had already proven his character, and her recognition of his selflessness created a bond that went beyond words. The little girl, unaware of the deeper conversation taking place, continued to play, occasionally looking up at Jake with curious eyes. Her laughter was a soothing backdrop, a reminder that the act of kindness had real, tangible effects. Watching her, the mother felt a wave of gratitude, not just for Jake's bravery in the snowstorm, but for the lesson he had unknowingly imparted to her daughter. She realized that children learned about character, generosity, and compassion, not just through words, but through examples. Jake had shown her daughter in the most vivid way possible what it meant to care for others selflessly. Throughout the conversation, the mother noticed the humility in Jake's demeanor. He spoke plainly, without exaggeration or desire for praise. He didn't boast about the risks he had taken, nor did he try to impress her with stories of bravery. He simply described his actions as part of being human, part of doing what needed to be done. That humility struck her deeply. She had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, dealing with people who often valued titles, power, and recognition above all else. Jake's simplicity, honesty, and genuine kindness were a refreshing contrast. A reminder that true value was often hidden in everyday actions and quiet courage. As the snowstorm raged outside, the warmth inside the living room created an atmosphere of trust and openness. They began to talk about dreams, hopes, and aspirations beyond work and survival. The mother shared her desire to create opportunities for others, to give back in ways that mattered, and to ensure her daughter grew up with values of compassion and empathy. Jake spoke about his dream of expanding his garage someday, not just as a business, but as a place where he could help people in practical ways, support his community, and mentor young mechanics who shared his passion. Their conversation was full of laughter, reflection, and mutual respect, a meeting of minds from very different worlds. At one point, the mother paused and looked at Jake with a new understanding. She realized that the same qualities that had allowed her to succeed, determination, integrity, and a willingness to act decisively, were also present in him, but just expressed differently. He didn't have a corner office or a corporate title, but he had the same courage, resourcefulness, and moral compass that had guided her to where she was. It was a moment of recognition, a silent acknowledgement that greatness wasn't limited to one form or path. Character, kindness, and courage could be found in unexpected places. And Jake was living proof. The conversation also revealed an important lesson for both of them. For the mother, it was a reminder that life's most meaningful moments often came from the simplest acts of love and generosity. For Jake, it was a reminder that even small gestures could create connections, open doors, and leave lasting impressions. The toy he had delivered was more than just a gift. It had become a symbol of trust, integrity, and the power of human connection. Both realized that acts of kindness had a ripple effect, influencing not just the recipient, but everyone who witnessed or participated in them. As the hours passed, the storm outside began to subside slightly, but inside the warmth of connection and understanding grew. They shared stories of challenges, triumphs, and mistakes, learning from each other in ways they hadn't anticipated. The mother, despite her busy life and responsibilities, found herself appreciating the simplicity and purity of Jake's perspective. Jake in turn felt valued and understood in a way that few people had ever offered him. The moment was rare, intimate, and profoundly human, a meeting of hearts and minds that transcended social status, wealth, and circumstance. The little girls. Laughter occasionally punctuated their conversation, reminding them both of why they were there, why their actions mattered, and why kindness was never wasted. Every smile, every giggle, reinforced the idea that life's greatest rewards often came in unexpected forms. Jake had risked the snowstorm, and in return, he had received more than he could have imagined: a sense of purpose, a meaningful connection, and the knowledge that his actions had touched lives in a significant way. By the time Jake prepared to leave, the bond between them had solidified. It wasn't just a simple act of delivering a toy anymore. It had grown into a meaningful relationship built on respect, understanding, and shared values. The mother expressed her gratitude, again, not just for the delivery, for the lessons Jake had demonstrated through his actions: humility, courage, selflessness, and integrity. Jake smiled, accepting the thanks quietly, knowing that the real reward was the joy he had brought to the little girl and the trust he had built with her mother. As he stepped back into the snow, ready to return to his garage, he carried more than the physical exhaustion of the journey. He carried the warmth of human connection, the satisfaction of making a meaningful difference, and the understanding that simple acts of kindness could create profound and lasting effects. The snowstorm had been harsh, the journey difficult, but the experience had been transformative, not just for the little girl and her mother, but for Jake as well. It was a reminder that courage, compassion, and integrity were timeless values, capable of bridging gaps between people, overcoming obstacles, and leaving an enduring mark on the world. That evening, as Jake drove back through the snow-covered streets, he reflected on the day's events. The journey, the struggles, and the delivery of the toy had become more than just a story of a snowy day. It had become a testament to the power of human kindness, the importance of perseverance, and the unexpected rewards of acting with a generous heart. The connection he had made with the mother was proof that meaningful relationships often emerge in the most unlikely circumstances, and that life's true value lies in the way we touch the lives of others. As the storm outside finally began to calm, Jake prepared to leave the warm living room and return to his garage. The journey back would be just as challenging, with icy roads and deep snow to navigate, but it didn't matter to him. He had accomplished what he had set out to do. The little girl had her toy, her laughter still echoing in the room, and the mother had seen firsthand the dedication, courage, and kindness that defined him. Yet as Jake stepped outside into the cold, he had no idea that this simple act of delivering a toy was about to change the course of his life in ways he could never have imagined. The mother followed him to the door, her eyes thoughtful and serious. She had spent the past hours observing him, learning about his values, his determination, and the selflessness that had brought him through the snowstorm. And now, standing in the frostbitten yard, she realized that Jake's character was rare. People often spoke of integrity, kindness, and courage, but she had rarely seen them demonstrated so clearly, especially in someone who expected nothing in return. She decided in that moment that she could offer him more than just gratitude. She could offer him opportunity. "Jake," she said, her voice steady but warm, "I want to help you." Jake paused, surprised. He wasn't expecting this. He had delivered the toy out of a simple desire to help a little girl, not to gain recognition, jobs, or favors. Yet her offer wasn't about reward. It was about acknowledging his talent, his dedication, and his potential to do more. She explained that as a CEO, she had resources, connections, an influence that could help him expand his garage, reach more people in need, and make a bigger impact on his community. Jake was hesitant at first. He had never imagined that one act of kindness could lead to such an opportunity. He was used to living a simple life, working hard day after day in his small garage, helping people when he could, and taking pride in his work without expecting anything beyond personal satisfaction. But the mother insisted, explaining that people like him were rare, and she wanted to support him in achieving more than he had ever thought possible. She emphasized that it wasn't about money or status, it was about making a larger difference in the world, just as he had already done for her daughter, the little girl. Curious as always, peeked out from the living room, watching the adults with wide eyes. She had no idea about the complexities of business, opportunity, or corporate influence. But she understood the excitement in her mother's voice and the surprise in Jake's expression. Her presence was a reminder of why all this was happening, why kindness mattered, and why even small actions could ripple into life-changing events. The sight of her holding the toy, smiling, and occasionally waving to Jake made the moment even more meaningful. Over the next few minutes, they discussed practical details. The mother offered to connect Jake with suppliers, provide advice on expanding his business, and introduce him to networks that could help him reach more customers and clients. She wanted him to continue being the same humble, hardworking man, but with the ability to do even more good for more people. Jake listened, absorbing every word, realizing that this opportunity wasn't just about growing his business. It was about amplifying the positive impact he could have on his community. It was a chance to take his simple acts of kindness and turn them into something larger, something that could touch countless lives. Jake's mind raced as he thought about the possibilities. He imagined a larger garage with more resources, able to help more people, train more mechanics, and serve his community better. He envisioned outreach programs, free services for those in need, and a reputation built not just on skill, but on character. And yet he reminded himself to stay grounded. No matter how big the opportunity became, he wanted to remain the same man who risked a snowstorm to deliver a toy, who helped people without expecting anything in return, and who valued kindness above all else. The mother smiled as she saw Jake's thoughtful expression. She recognized that he was already a man of integrity, one who would not be swayed by wealth or status alone. She assured him that her support came with no strings attached, only the hope that he would continue to act with the same heart and courage that had brought him to her doorstep. It was a rare offer, one that spoke volumes about her character as well. She had wealth, influence, and power. But she recognized that real value lay in people like Jake, whose actions spoke louder than titles. As Jake prepared to finally leave, he felt a mixture of emotions. There was relief, satisfaction, and pride in what he had accomplished, but also excitement and hope for what lay ahead. The snowstorm, which had started as a challenge, had transformed into an opportunity. A story of courage, kindness, and unexpected connections. What began as a simple promise to deliver a toy had grown into a moment that could reshape his life and the lives of others around him. He realized that sometimes life's most meaningful moments came from the simplest acts, performed with sincerity and heart. The mother and Jake shook hands, a silent understanding passing between them. There were no promises beyond what had been said, no expectations beyond the shared desire to do good. Yet in that handshake was a bond formed through respect, admiration, and recognition of each other's values. Jake got into his truck, feeling the cold snow on his coat, but warmed by the knowledge that his small act had created something far greater than he could have imagined. Driving back through the snow-covered streets, Jake reflected on the day's events. Every challenge he had faced, the drifting snow, the icy roads, the fatigue, the freezing wind, now seemed like small sacrifices in the face of the joy he had brought and the connection he had made. He realized that life often rewards those who act with courage and kindness, even when they least expect it. Sometimes, the universe has a way of turning selfless actions into life-changing opportunities, and Jake had experienced that firsthand as he navigated through the remaining snowdrifts. He thought about the little girl and her laughter, the warmth of the mother's gratitude, and the new possibilities ahead. He understood that his life had shifted not because he sought recognition, but because he had chosen to act with integrity and compassion. The journey had taught him lessons about perseverance, human connection, and the unpredictable ways in which kindness can return to us. By the time Jake reached his garage, the storm had eased, leaving behind a quiet, snow-covered town. He parked his truck, reflecting on the day's journey from the relentless snowstorm to the joyful delivery. From the conversations in the warm living room to the unexpected opportunity offered by the CEO, he realized that life's most profound moments often came in the most unexpected ways, and that the smallest acts, performed with sincerity, could change lives, including one's own. As he stepped inside the garage, shaking off the remaining snow, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that the toy he had delivered was more than just a gift. It was the catalyst for a connection that would shape the future. The experience had reminded him of the importance of courage, compassion, and integrity, and how these qualities could bridge gaps between people from very different worlds. Jake was ready for whatever came next, knowing that the choices he made, guided by kindness and determination, could create ripples far beyond what he had imagined. That night, as he closed the garage and prepared for rest, he reflected on the extraordinary day. The snowstorm had been harsh, the journey difficult, but the outcome was life-changing. The little girl's laughter, the mother's gratitude, and the unexpected opportunity had created a story he would never forget, a story of humility, courage, selflessness, and the incredible power of simple acts of kindness to transform lives. In the quiet of his garage, Jake smiled, knowing that he had not just delivered a toy, he had delivered hope, happiness, and a promise of a brighter future.